Okay, this should be working. Let me go to my channel. There it is. Okay. All right. So, assuming this is all working, let's try this again. So I tried to do this yesterday. I got like an hour in, and then I realized that the slides actually weren't changing, which is not ideal. So let's hopefully we fixed that problem, and we can move on today. So I've got my other thing open. This is chapter 4. We will do what I managed to get done in class on Monday, which is not as much as I would have gotten done because we were short about 30 minutes from technical difficulties. All right, so what do you want, kitty? All right. All right, let me grab the book real quick. Because I like to read some of these quotes. Samuel Sewell. Okay, good. The thing here actually seems to be doing what I'd like it to do. So Samuel Sewell railed against the I guess you'd say well, there really wasn't a lot of secular authorities of the day. But he saw anything that wasn't good enough for him as high-handed wickedness. And this included we've got examples here. Spending more time in the counting house than in the church, wearing scarlet and gold jackets and simple black cloth. Don't get on this cord. Wearing powdered wigs in place of God-given hair. And the book mentions he claimed that such, quote, high-handed wickedness had hardly been heard of before. You know, just ignoring the many, many wars of the past and the atrocities done in the wars, but, you know, wearing wigs and wearing clothes that aren't fit for monastic priests. Yeah, that's the worst thing ever. Okay. Some were not quite as bad as Samuel Sewell. We had Cotton Mather, son of Increased Mather. Fantastic, fantastic name that. He still complained about things. Let's see. Bemoaned the declining number of colonists who participate in public feast days, their greater interest in the latest fashions and the state of their souls. But he also wanted his son to be able to become, quote, a more refined gentleman. He saw the benefit in the increasing wealth of especially in the New England region. And unlike Sewell, who was like, we should all basically be monks. was at least open to the rest of society. Oh yeah, here we are. He was supported smallpox inoculation. Let's see how the book words it. And again, this book was written before. Yeah, this book was written in 2013, or at least it was copyrighted in 2013. Let's see. Fascinated by new scientific endeavors, supported inoculations for smallpox. Others viewed as challenging God's power. Boy, that sounds familiar. Um, I mean, I know, of course, in the last several years, uh, you've got certain religious nut jobs that are railing against the COVID vaccine, but that's always been a thing for certain groups. The ones I'm familiar with are like really, really aggressive evangelicals, and it wasn't use my words. It's been like all vaccines, even like the flu vaccine, the flu shot, and I don't know. That's just always been a thing. So the fact that Cotton Mather in like the 1600s, it's like, hey, not getting smallpox sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. And he's a reverend, a Puritan reverend. That's saying a lot. The Glorious Revolution in England did give them some regained authority. Again, it wasn't quite as much power as when Cromwell was in charge, but it was certainly better than, say, Charles II, which he was focusing on Anglicanism again. And then James was even worse because that was Catholicism, and can't have that. Quit digging at my stuff, cat. The one thing from teaching from home is you got this damn little kitten who wants to be in the middle of everything. Lay down. It's a book. Quit being fascinated by the book. She is fascinated by the book. Okay. But with the outbreak of King William's War and more fighting with the natives, and now she's pissed at the mouse. There was increased anxiety about native attacks. This belief that Satan was working in the region because anything that was scary and different was 100% Satan. Which again, you can look at certain evangelical megachurch pastors and see how that's not changed a whole lot, or at the very least, that's coming back into the thing. Which, like I said, that's not that different from when I was growing up, and that's not that different from like the 50s. So it's not. It's just not changed. Like there may have been a time when that wasn't the thing, but it hasn't been very long. Anyway, here's Samuel Sewell. He's kind of gouty looking. He's like, oh, we can't have all these earthly goods, but he seemed to be partaking in earthly goods. Cotton Mather, this interesting hair. Sorry, cats all over everything. Quit, kitty. Go see Otto. He's in the window. Cotton Mather. Anyway, this is what we were waiting on. Cries of witchcraft. Because we're talking about religious anxieties and the Puritans. you kind of usually know where we're going. So, this wasn't something new in America. This wasn't a new idea. This has been a thing in Europe for hundreds of years. I mean, if there was ever something they didn't understand, unexpected storms, suspicious fires, livestock dying, whatever, Satan done it. And Satan working through the human world was witchcraft. And again, there are literally evangelical pastors that are like, yep, witchcraft's a thing. Satan's after us. Um, so yeah, there's of course this idea that God worked through nature, so Satan could too, just to a lesser degree. He had deformed children, astrological signs, eclipses. I mean, and as I mentioned with my other classes, yeah, eclipses are spooky. Like I was in the path of totality for the last one. I was upstate when it came through, and it was weird. It was real weird, very eerie. So as far as who got blamed for being witches, anybody who's outside the norm, which is to say anyone that could not easily defend themselves, typically women, if they were seen as quarrelsome, eccentric, or poor. So, again, well, I'll just go to the next slide. I'm getting ahead of myself. We like, if there's some old widow living in the woods, well, yeah, that's easy to blame her because nobody's going to come to her defense. She's just some weird old lady living in the woods. But if you try to, blame the Earl of Saxony or whatever, um, yeah, you're going to be thrown in jail or worse. So that's not going to work out so well for you. So back in the colonies, well, overall, these typically came about during times of change as stuff was shifting around and people were being uncomfortable with the changes. And back in the colonies, the 17th century was full of such changes. Colonists were pushing west, taking land from the natives, which obviously caused the natives to become hostile, as well as harsh environments, which led to often deaths just from, well, being in unfamiliar areas. And, there'd be disease, or the crops would die, or the animals would die, etc. So, between 1647 and 1692, this roughly 50-year period, yeah, I'm rounding up, and we're specifically stopping in 1692 because that's when the big thing happens. And we'll get to that next slide. 160 individuals were accused of being witches, and in Massachusetts and Connecticut, we're keeping it in that area because, well, that becomes important. Uh, 15 of the 160 who were accused were actually put to death, which, 15 people being killed for supposed witchcraft is far too many. But again, keep that in mind. 160 accused, 15 killed. Typically ruined crops, neighbors becoming sick, cattle dying, these things that typically can't be explained. Perhaps it was due to malicious witchcraft. Okay, cool. And again, typically those who were accused were poor, childless, or otherwise disgruntled women. But, and this is where things get interesting, sometimes those who were accused were widows who had inherited property. and if they fought to keep their rights from male relatives or neighbors, they were seen as suspicious and therefore witches, so how dare they stand up for themselves? Anyway, I've got this fun little image of Satan hanging out with witches, I guess. I don't know, Satan looks real chill here. Yeah, here. I don't know what the things above him are supposed to be. I mean, I guess demons, but I like to say that they're like South Carolina mosquitoes. And then we've got whatever's going on here. Um, some kind of accusation of witchcraft, and there's a black cat freaking out, and there's a kid peeking over the table, and yeah, there's a lot happening. And another reason, another illustration that I've got, and the reason why I like these illustrations with a lot going on, is once you start looking at the details, they're really weird. So the central focus, since this isn't like a medieval painting and it's just a glob of mess going on. You've got the guy being dragged away and the people in the stocks, right? But like once you start looking at the people, everybody's having a good time. Like everybody's smiling except for the guy being lifted in the air and the man in the stocks. But the woman in the stocks is smiling. Does my mouse show up on this screen? It'll take a while to see. The woman's smiling. And obviously all the people on the sides are smiling. And the people on the sides, I guess that kind of makes sense because oh, it's a public showing of the punishment or whatever. But you've got this kid up here in the corner in the house, like leaning out the window watching. I don't have a real precise view of this because I'm using presenter view. Just like watching what's going on, having a good time. You're a little further apparently. And there's a lot of that. I mean, we had the kid looking over the table, like watching what was happening. And there's a lot of that. I think that's just a tree. But it's strange. I don't know. So on to Salem. Obviously, the most famous, or I suppose you could say infamous, American witch hunt was Salem in the 1690s. So I've got to give some background here. Not all of it's in the book, but I'll try to let you guys know what was going down before we get to when everything happened, because you need background to really understand why it went so bad so fast. So Salem was dealing with all the changes and anxieties of New England, the Glorious Revolution, the native attacks because of the various wars going on, mercantile families moving in and having disagreements with the settled farmers who are already there. Also, though, the election of a new minister, and that was kind of a big deal. This isn't really mentioned in the book, but I've got like larger notes that talk more about like the details going on at Salem. So in the Puritan towns, they weren't set up like, say the towns here in the South where you turn a corner and there's like six churches and signs pointing to like four more down the road. Like when I ride to school in the mornings, go through Coward and uh, Scranton and all those other places. It's just like as soon as you're past a church, there's another one. That's how the Dunkin' Donuts are up in the north or northeast. Um, in the Puritan towns, the way they were set up, the churches were like part of the government almost, which is how Anglican systems were set up. Um, the church was part of the government. That was normal in England. I think technically the Anglican Church is still part of like the English government. I think I don't know how that works. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, so like you had for these smaller towns, I'm sure the big cities had more than one just for the sake of numbers. But like for a town the size of Salem, you had one church, and the minister of that church was basically a political figure. He was like as much a political figure as the mayor of the town or a member of the city council or whatever. So they didn't have a minister for a couple of years, and the church remained open, but it didn't really have a leadership, uh, a form of leadership. So it was they were very it was I guess rudderless would be the best way to put it. They were just kind of drifting, and in a Puritan worldview, that's not good. um, and when they did get a new minister, he was not from the area. He was not from Salem. He was not from. I don't know if he was even from Massachusetts. Um, and there was a lot of disagreements with this guy. He butted heads with the families. Um, he just didn't fit in. And if you've ever read any Stephen King book about, well, anything in the Northeast ever, the idea of coming into a small New England town and not fitting in and the town seeing you as an outsider is like part of the horror, typically. So that's already like a lot of pressure in this town. Is this guy they're supposed to look at as a leader, specifically for their religious needs, is seen as an outsider and is really combative with them, honestly. So there's a lot of pressure before anything ever even happens. And then things start happening. This new minister, Reverend Samuel Parris, his daughter and niece, who had been raised in this Puritan culture, um, went to Paris's slave from the West Indies to Tuba, and we're learning things about her voodoo culture. The book just mentions lore and exotic dances. Again, the notes that I have from the other professor mention like fortune telling, seances. It mentions specifically that she, one of the fortune telling things that she did was there was like a crystal. It was not a crystal ball. It was like a bowl, and she cracked an egg into it, and it was supposed to like form this shape that was supposed to tell your future. I think it was specifically supposed to like tell the future your like of your love life because these girls were like early teenagers, so that's where their minds were, and being good Puritan girls, like, oh, what are about their future husband or whatever. But when Tituba did this, they thought they saw a skull because, again, they've got this idea of fire and brimstone and all this other stuff from their Puritan uprising, uh, Puritan upbringing. That's the word I'm looking for. Upbringing. Um, and so they freak out and they're basically having panic attacks. And the parents are noticing this, and eventually it all comes out. So their response is to blame Tituba because we're in big, scary Puritan land, and you don't want to get in trouble for learning about voodoo. But it wasn't like, oh, she made us learn these. It was, oh, she bewitched us and, controlled our minds or whatever. But they didn't stop there. There's a lot to this. The girls are seen like having spasms and hallucinations, and supposedly in these hallucinations they saw um like an elderly female pauper who was, typically in the outskirts of town, a homeless widow, the typical witch people. And these two in particular, does the book actually give us their names? No. Um, the first two are usually the ones whose names are most often given. Um, I used to remember this, but I don't anymore. Anyway, um, the first two were like ones who were typically seen as maybe witches in town anyway, so like that was already primed in the girls' minds. Um, but the girls kept bringing up names: respectable church women, a minister, a wealthy merchant, even a 4-year-old child. It was like, oh, these people are coming to us in our dreams and bewitching us. And soon they had accused of more than 100 people, 80% of whom were women. So we're already getting up to that, close to that 160 that have been accused, um, and over the course of 50 years. So, due to how rapidly this was spiraling out of control, the governor of Massachusetts, William Phipps, who had just been elected in 1692, came to I'm gonna go ahead and mute that. Came to Salem, set up a special court, and appointed Puritan leaders to preside because this was just the norm. Puritan leaders, they're not going to be biased at all. And one of the Puritan leaders who presided was Samuel Sewall. Remember him? Well, here he is again. One of the main forms of evidence that they took in these cases was seen as spectral evidence, or was called spectral evidence. This was taken from dreams and visions that the girls had, a lot of times when they were hallucinating, which resulted in 20 executions. According to the book, 20 hangings, and one person was crushed to death by stones. One of my students in one of my previous classes mentioned that it was the child that was crushed to death by stones. I guess because they weren't heavy enough to be hanged. Because a proper hanging, um, it is meant to break your neck. Like, it's not where you're hanging and it's slowly choking you. That's not done right. Uh, you stand on the platform and the platform falls out from under you and you drop and it snaps your neck, and it's quick and presumably painless. Um, being crushed to death by stones sounds not painless. But they didn't burn anybody at the stake here. That's a European way of doing things. But this wasn't the end of the trials. More people were being accused. Prominent Salem and Boston families were soon being brought to the court, and I want to say Phipps's wife as well. Anyway, he eventually stepped in and just stopped the trials entirely. It's like, all right, we've had enough of this. I think he also specifically decided that they couldn't use spectral evidence anymore because it was bad. And there's my cat sitting on my book. Get on the back of the couch, please. I can come over here and sit in my lap. Step on my stomach. So I've got some illustrations here. Again, another one of these where there's a lot happening, so you can kind of take it all in. Got the lady there, the lightning coming through the window, and everybody freaking out. The dude laying on the floor. But then you got the guy behind her, pulling his sword, like he's gonna fight the lightning. Or more likely, he's gonna take her down, but I just like the idea of him just jumping that podium and attacking the lightning. This is a European thing, burning at the stake. Originally I was like, I don't know why they're just tossing a baby in there like that. That's kind of messed up. Again, the student in one of our previous classes said due to the way the baby's just falling like that, that might imply the demon coming out of the lady as she's being burned. Because, it's believed that witches are possessed by demons or whatever. So that might be what's going on, rather than yeeting a baby into the fire. I'll choose to believe that. Alright. Let's get a little further, so we'll be caught up with my Monday, Wednesday class. So tomorrow, when hopefully I can record it from class, we'll be in the right place. So, this kind of goes with Salem stuff. Early on in the American colonies, there were not a lot of women, in particular women workers, so the white women there did have some degree of power. Indentured servants who managed to survive their terms of service were able to marry older men of wealth, and if the men died first, which usually how it went, the widows could actually gain property rights, which was basically the only way you could gain property rights in the colonies. Oh, there's my cat being a little shit. Alright. Oops. Anyway. As things got closer to the end of the 1600s, gender roles began evening out. Stop attacking the window! My outside cat wants food, but he can wait. Slavery and servitude were spreading out labor, so women were less likely to gain control of these estates. Women were pushing domestic roles. There was this English common law called femme caveur. It defined a wife's legal status as being covered over, or to be more directly translated, because this is kind of old French / old English, hidden behind her husbands. or to make it even simpler, why can't I? There we go. The legal status of a wife was the same as that of the legal status of a child. They were totally under the control of their husband. So you have the patriarchal family, which was seen as, quote, the bulwark against disorder as the country became more diverse because diversity is scary. Like the, what's it called? Traditional gender roles because diversity is scary. That's all I'm going to say there. This control was sought after in wealthy families, where these families wanted to control the behavior of their sons and daughters, build commercial and political alliances, because, rich people are also weird. Some women did manage to escape these fathers and husbands, but most were trapped in this system even after the death of the husband in question. As we mentioned in the witchcraft slide, even after, say, the husband died, a lot of times, like a male relative or even a neighbor would push for control of the property rights over the widow, and legally would usually win. So yeah, there was a lot of screwy stuff going on there. So here's the best picture I could get of like a colonial family. Get the two cats there in the back, the dog under the table, the wife and I guess daughter there, uh, doing some sewing. I like the husband there with that really long pipe, like sitting on the table. Like he's got it in his mouth, but it's also sitting on the table. It's very strange. Um, a student in my Monday class mentioned that just from the way they're sitting, you can tell there's not a lot of warmth in that relationship. You've got the husband sitting there, leaning, well, stage left, our right, his left, and the wife is looking the other direction, uh, paying more attention to what the daughter's up to and her own sewing than whatever the husband's doing. So yeah, it's certainly a what's the word? It's a transactional marriage. Now, this is all just before we move to the next slide. This is all what it is in the law. Like this is what it is written down in the law. But that's not always how things went. Um so there were these legal discrepancies between men and women, but most colonists were more worried about being able to work together and survive and having enough labor to, well, get their jobs done. So in 1712, Benjamin Wadsworth wrote this book, The Wildered Family. He told couples to delight in each other's company, be helpful to each other, and bear one another's burdens. Um, I don't think the couple from that previous image delighted each other's company, but this is a suggestion from that time that, hey, maybe don't just make this a transactional economic thing. Let's try and be happy. Try and get along. It'll make things easier. So with artisans, for example, wives would learn the husband's craft. So shoemakers or even glass blowers, uh, print shops, that sort of thing. The wife would learn the craft and be able to help with the apprentices as well as with the children. Apprentices would often be children, so it would be something she'd kind of have an idea of what she was doing anyway, as well as learning the craft, which was typically not what was meant to be in like the legal separation. Now, most colonists lived on farms, and there was a distinctive difference in the jobs that they did, but it still wasn't quite like what you see in um a lot of old western shows where like the wife and daughter stay inside and cook and clean and maybe sew clothes. Like, yes, they worked in the home, but they were also still on the farm. They worked in the garden, the milk house, the chicken coop, um, the dairy. Well, I don't know why the dairy and the milk house are separate. And the wash house, which wash house is a nightmare. But they're still like keeping animals, and they're working with plants. They're just not in the larger section of the farm, which is where the men usually were, the fields, the livestock, and the orchards. So like they still kept sections of the farms. Um, they just tended to like divvy it out. But as I've said 100 times, these families weren't self-sufficient. If they had extra money, they bring in servants, slaves, or hired farmhands to help them with the work, especially around fall, because the harvest was the most important thing. Um, if they had surplus crops or goods they manufactured, they bring them to the local community to trade for stuff that they didn't have. And this is again something that I've mentioned a bunch because it's just something that we taught a bunch in my technology course. Oh, excuse me. Um, these households would usually specialize either with labor or equipment and provide these goods and services to each other in exchange for goods and services that they didn't have. So, if one farm managed to have a grist mill, which is what you use to grind the wheat into flour, they're going to be highly sought after by everybody else. And if you want to use the grist mill, you'll need to pay a little something. But usually, bring some eggs or bring some milk or bring some crops of the farm that you've got, and then the person with the grist mill won't have to provide that for themselves. This farm probably isn't gonna make it. You've got what appears to be a dead husband and older son there, and a broken down horse, a younger son, and that dog is trying his best, but they're in bad shape. Excuse me. So I think this is the last thing we talk about here. Let me check the book. Yeah. Um. So farm work required men and women. So marriage was this economic institution as well as social and religious because I don't know, marriage is weird. The less I talk about that, the better. Um. Mortality wasn't as bad as we sometimes think about in this era. I mean, it was still bad, especially for children. But if you made it past like 2, you were probably gonna be okay. Um, by 1700, if you lived to 45, a woman could have around 8 children. Um, mortality rates in New England were the best; they were the lowest. While in the Chesapeake they were the highest due to, the the disease and the mosquitoes and all that good stuff. So not great for being alive. Um, Obviously, among enslaved Africans and African Americans, fertility rate was much lower because, well, not being taken care of, and the malnutrition. Was until the 1740s that more of these enslaved people were born in the colonies than were actually imported. And this, of course, depended on what work they were performing. If they were out in the field breaking their backs, they probably weren't able to have as many children. If they were doing domestic work in the houses, they usually were in a little better shape. We had immigrants from Europe as well. Usually the Irish and the Scots. They tended to have a lot of kids, especially the Irish. You know, they were Catholics, and having a lot of kids is a Catholic thing. And typically, regardless of where they were on the spectrum, um, mothers had to combine the work of raising their kids with whatever other work they were doing. Some of the richer families managed to afford like nannies and wet nurses, but most of the times they had to fend for themselves, and it was rough. Uh, Also, you were very likely to just die in childbirth. That was a very high chance of dying in childbirth. Let me grab this quote real quick. Um, One minister urged pregnant women to prepare their souls, claiming, "For aught you to know, your death has entered into you." You know, encouraging words right before having a baby. Yeah, there was a 1 in 30 chance of dying during childbirth. And when this happened, the father would usually remarry pretty quickly afterwards because while he had legal rights over the kids, childcare was considered woman's work, and you can't do that. Also, here's some horrifying, soulless uh, colonial family people. Also managed to get a picture. This is, again, obviously from the 1800s because they've got photographs. Um, but even with these really old photographs, they do capture a lot of detail. Now, I think that's where I ended my class. Yes, because we had one more to go, but I didn't want to push it too much further. Okay, so um, that was a pain in the butt to have to do for like the third time. But now I can put this up on Blackboard, and then we can continue on tomorrow. I meant to do it earlier, but I got home and passed out, and I didn't mean to. So anyway, um, yeah, that was Monday's class. So so yeah, that'll do it. Uh, I'll try and post this as soon as I can, and we'll get into the rest of it later on. So I'll see you guys. Well, I don't think any of you guys are awake for my 8:30 class, which understandable. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. All right, let me go to the slideshow or the streamer thing, streaming, whatever. Anyway, talk to you guys later. Bye. of course, I've got a